Welcome to Negotiation with Alice, your negotiation podcast. Everything that you do where you need to get on the same page with someone else is a negotiation. So whether you have to negotiate a contract with someone, or you simply need your boss to sign off on that program that you'd like to implement, or you want to figure out how to rebalance the chore structure in your home, or talk about what vacation you want to go on. All of these things are negotiations. So in my podcast, we go over both personal and professional conversations, which all are considered negotiation, and I will give you tips on how to come out ahead. Welcome to the show. Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Negotiation with Alice. Today, I've got Jeremy Pollack here with us today. Hi, Jeremy.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. So Jeremy and I have been working together as I've worked as a mediator with Jeremy in workplaces, and Jeremy's also coming out with a new book called Wired for Peace. But Jeremy, I'd love for you to share with my audiences a bit more about the work that you do, who you work with, and what inspired you to write the book.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm the CEO of Pollack Peacebuilding Systems, and we're a workplace conflict management consulting and training firm. We do a lot of coaching, intervention work, training work across all types of organizations, from very large companies, nonprofits, government agencies, down to small kind of mom and pop shops too. So do a lot of different types of work in the workplace. Generally call it workplace peace building, but it takes a lot of different forms. One of the things, I was inspired to write this book specifically because I'm noticing in this industry, starting from grad school and all the way through sort of practitioner, there's just a lack of a focus on the neurobiology of conflict resolution. Certainly, there's been a lot of talk around, the fight or flight states and the amygdala hijacking and all that stuff. And that's just kind of one area of what's going on in conflict. There's a lot of other things happening in the brain and the nervous system when we're trying to resolve conflicts. And there was nothing really comprehensive about it. And I thought it's about time to focus on this dimension. We've got a lot of focus on interpersonal communication and structural, systemic issues, but nothing really on the internal individual front of like how nervous systems are responding to conflict. So yeah, was super interested in that. And that's why I wrote the book.
And is the book geared towards professionals, or is it geared really towards anyone who wants to deal better with conflict?
Yeah, I mean, it's really supposed to be for anybody who's interested in conflict. I mean, it does have a fair amount of science in it, but it's not an academic book. It's really focused on people who are interested in the science, but also really interested in practical techniques for using brain science to resolve conflicts more effectively. So hopefully, but I think coaches and practitioners as well, I try to make it sort of universal for everybody.
That's wonderful. I'm excited to read it when it comes out. And I'm very excited to start a conversation today with you because I very much enjoy the neuroscience behind conflict. And so I'd love to have my audience, learn a little bit more about that research from you, Jeremy. And so let's just sort of dive right in. And maybe you can talk us through sort of, you initially mentioned how there's a lot of work around the amygdala, fight, flight, freeze, and what happens there. But let's just sort of just touch upon that briefly before we go a little bit deeper for my audience members who maybe aren't really clear on that piece of it.
Sure. Basically the book is formatted into 7 principles that are neuroscience based principles. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to bring out typical practices or principles in conflict practices, but use neuroscience to kind of support them, which is something that I think it brings something new to the conversation. So the first chapter is all about de-escalation, and and it's the longest chapter, and it's because there's been so much written on this particular topic of what is happening in an escalated state during escalated conflict. Not all conflicts are escalated, but a lot of times when we think about conflict, we think about escalated conflict, meaning emotionally charged. Things are happening in our biology that are making us feel defensive. All kinds of physiological things are happening as well as psychological. And the types of the areas of the brain, specifically the limbic system, generally, certain areas like the regions like the amygdala are sort of hyperactive. When those areas get hyperactive, certain neurochemicals and hormones get released in the body, and then other parts of the brain start to be what we'd say down regulated. So, like sort of the prefrontal cortex areas, other areas, even some of the areas associated with mirror neurons, associated with connection, some of the vagal tone, et cetera. So the parasympathetic starting to downregulate, sympathetic starting to upregulate, specifically around sort of stress. And parasympathetic or sympathetic can upregulate around excitement as well. But in this case, typically around stress, it's because on some level our brains are perceiving a threat. And when it perceives a threat and we go into defense mode and these particular brain areas are more activated, the things that we typically think of as how resolving conflict, communicating, caring, staying curious, being collaborative, being creative, all of these areas start to get inhibited by the particular brain areas that are upregulated during an escalated state. And so that's what that sort of first section is talking about. And then really going into what are some techniques there's a ton of self-regulation techniques, but really thinking about self-regulation, what are some techniques that we can use to just try to keep ourselves in somewhat of a calmer state when we're trying to resolve conflict. If that is the goal, if we're trying to, resolve in a peaceful way, how do we de-escalate?
I've got a great example. A lot of times people talk about what you talk about, and then it's difficult for the layperson to really see that in action. Like, what does that really look like, right? Aside from just a fight or conflict. And I'm going to tell you that several years ago, I thought someone was breaking into my house. So there was a guy that came to my front door, banging on the door. So clearly, like, my amygdala gets activated.
Yeah.
I'm in fight or flight mode, and I'm looking through the Ring camera, and all I see is someone trying to break in. So I'm completely flooded with fear, right? And then it records that. The next day, when I've sufficiently calmed down, I watch the same recording of what happened, and it looks entirely different, Jeremy.
Yeah.
It's the same thing because it's a recording. But because I'm in fight or flight, I'm seeing things through the lens of, I'm about to be attacked. And so my brain only picked up on the actions that looked like he was going to attack me, which is him turning the doorknob, him banging on the door, him yelling. And then the next day, what I noticed is that he was drunk, stumbling, he's moving around. So he was actually at the wrong house, thinking he was locked out of his friend's house and demanding.
I've seen that before.
Yeah. Right? So it's interesting because it actually, I witnessed really for the first time. I'm like, wow, my brain actually did perceive something differently when I was, like you said, when all the fear and everything like that is, it's inhibiting my rational side from seeing the truth, which was, he's stumbling. He's like not steady on his feet. The way he's talking is sounding a little bit strange as well. He's clearly like drunk. Yeah. And therefore, that's why he was acting the way he was acting. So it was interesting that you talk about these differences, that, the way people perceive things, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, and you bring up a perfect example of the sort of interesting threshold that we have to deal with on a daily basis, especially in conflict. Because on one level, your nervous system was doing exactly what it was designed to do. It was designed to keep you safe, or at least part of it was designed to keep you safe, predict what's going to happen, map the world so that you know where the dangers are, and it did that, and it did it well, and pat your nervous system on the back for doing it well. The issue, especially with interpersonal conflict, is you miss a lot of the complexity and the nuance of particular situations when you're in that state. When you're not in that state anymore, you start to see some differences in what actually happened. And that's really important. And you can see people in conflict that are consistently escalated in what I would say is a protracted escalated conflict. Every time they're around each other, their nervous systems are active. Every time they think about each other, their nervous systems kind of get activated. And so they get into a very narrow field view of that individual or of the group that's targeted, that's sort of the stimulant of that nervous system response. And this becomes a condition,
Yes. I'm sure you've seen in the work that you're doing with the workplace conflict that it's not just in the moment of conflict, as you're saying right now, but it's like the person when they're getting ready for work,
Oh yeah,
they're
it's
already
always, yeah.
right. They're already starting to panic, like, oh gosh, I'm feeling uncomfortable. I got to get in the car. I have to drive to work. I have to be there for 8 hours with this person that
Yeah.
I've been in conflict with, right? So that escalation starts before they ever get to the workplace.
Yeah, and then you get into chronic escalated states. These, what I would call it, is a conflict cycle, or you could think of it as a conflict loop, where there's an escalation. Your brain gets trained on the stimulus, which is the individual. The stimulus gives you an escalated response. The response then tells your brain this is correct, and it reinforces itself. It creates more of a stimulus because then it only focuses on that sort of negative things, or frames everything in a negative way. And so it creates more, and this cycle happens, and your brain's conditioned, and you become into this like sort of ongoing chronic escalation, which is not good for you on a number of levels, mentally, physiologically, etc. So yeah, so I mean, that's one of the reasons I think, you know, tackling conflict in general is important, but we do it through the workplace. People spend a lot of time in the workplace. They spend a lot of time with each other. And if they're chronically escalated at work, their whole life is affected by it. And so I think it's important. It's an interesting kind of foot in the door to someone's life when we're looking at how they are at work.
Absolutely. And then all that causes stress, and then stress can cause illness, right? As we know.
100%. It's probably the biggest cause of illness there is stress, right? So yeah, absolutely.
So for the listeners who are going through this workplace conflict, or maybe they might have, ongoing conflict at home, what are some of the ways that they can start to change that brain chemistry? What are some of the techniques that you talk about in your book?
Yeah. So I mean, chat, like, principle one is about creating room for de-escalating before trying to solve conflicts. De-escalation is super important. It requires self-regulation. So using techniques for breathing techniques, relaxing the body, et cetera, different mental techniques, et cetera, for self-regulation. There's a whole bunch of them. Those are super important to practice and get good at. But I think there's also something else. And when I go into principle two, I get into the area of perception. And this is another kind of longer chapter, because perception is such a nuanced and interesting area. We get like we were talking about, we get conditioned. We're sort of, stimulus response animals. There's also a lot of different types of stimulus response relationships, reinforcement and punishment, stuff like that. And but our brains get conditioned around particular stimuli. So how the question, when we start to think about, like, I'm in conflict with some individual and I want to get out of that conflict, but I'm so escalated every time around them, I can't seem to get out of it. I can't seem to communicate well with them. I don't even want to talk to them. I just want to avoid them, etc. If you're really interested and motivated to change that, and some people are just not, there's like, I don't even want to work with the person anymore. I don't want to be in a relationship with them. If you're at that point and there's no reason to stay, then, maybe the path to peace is getting away. But if you want to stay at work, if you have to work with them, you have to figure out, how do I cooperate and collaborate with this person? Then you're going to have to do some reconditioning. And what I would suggest is, and this is something I go into in the sort of the tools section of chapter 2, is how do I recondition my stimulus response relationship to an individual? We can condition all day long to all kinds of things, and that's a lot of our learning happens from conditioning. But the question is like, how do I do that with an individual? It's tough because it's so dynamic. But we have to figure out a way. I mean, in my experience, and from what I've seen in some of the literature, it seems like the best way to, what I would call reassociate or recondition a stimulus, is first to decondition it, meaning that we turn the stimulus back to neutral so that we don't have a response. And then we could work on actually flipping it into a positive response, where I actually start to feel differently about the person. So first I got to bring them down to neutral, and then I can think about, do I want to actually feel different or better about the person rather than negative about them? And there's two main things happening when you're escalated. There's the psychology, and then there's the physiology. Your body's reacting and your mind's reacting, and both are reinforcing each other in a cycle. And so we have to tackle both. We have to be repetitive about it. We have to be disciplined about it. And every time we are exposed to the stimulus that creates the response, I need to figure out how to neutralize it. And there's different methods of doing that. But I mean, at the very least, how do I self-regulate my body? And how do I also figure out what's going on in my brain? What are the stories that are happening in my mind that are creating threat? And can I change the stories? So that I take a psychological approach to actually changing those. So even if I say something like a mantra, like, I'm safe, I'm okay, I can handle this, I'm in control. Those kinds of just how do I get those psychological needs met? To remind myself that I have those levers, those powers, those needs getting fulfilled by me. And then how do I get my body to relax? So if I'm around a stimulus and I want to decondition it, then I have to do repetitively. I have to get new neural circuits to start firing and the old ones to stop associating. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to try to make the thing benign. I'm going to be around the person. I'm going to say, that's okay. This isn't about me. I'm in control. I am safe. I'm okay. I'm going to be okay. Breathing, relaxing my body, feeling my body. I'm okay. I'm going to be okay. And I just keep doing it over and over. And everybody has their own mantra that's going to resonate with them, but you have to create something that's going to be helpful. So, I mean, doing that deconditioning work is, I think, step one. And then you can start to think about reappraising the individual and seeing if you can have a better response relationship with them.
Right. And if we want to push it out beyond the workplace, right now, I feel like the country is very polarized. So I think anyone can really think about the fact that if they think about someone on the other side of the political spectrum, most people are starting to feel triggered. I mean, I feel like one of the problems is that there is no longer a way for people to communicate with anyone who thinks very differently or has a very different belief system.
And why is that?
Right?
What's the story happening in someone's mind when they think about the other person? There's a perceived threat, right?
Yeah.
So what would alleviate the threat? And we can ask someone that. Like, each individual will have a different answer, and you could say, well, what would make you feel like you're not being threatened by that person? Well, they'd have to believe something. What's the someone's belief is not a threat itself. The threat is what they believe that belief will lead to in terms of action and behavior, right? And so, okay, so now the story becomes their belief is going to lead to something that threatens me or my family or my group or something like that.
Right.
And so the question is how do we start to relieve that? Now, you could say, well, it's true, it's going to happen, that kind of thing. So the only way to resolve that sort of is to either change the story in your mind. And how do you do that? You can tell yourself different stories and start to regulate yourself. You could also, if you're doing some sort of intervention work and you're working with two individuals who have different beliefs and they're trying to figure out how to communicate better, I think you have to get people to communicate that they actually care about each other, and that those threats that because the perception of threat and the perception of care are like two completely separate,
they're
on different ends of the spectrum. If I really believe you care about me, care about my well-being, I won't feel threatened by you. And if I really think you are a threat to me, then I'm not going to believe that you care about me. And so I have to adjust that. So how do we get people to express care, and B, register that someone is caring for them, if possible?
So you bring up an interesting point, because while a lot of the conflicts are happening because people feel like they're being threatened or are threatened, I do feel like most people do not realize that they are being threatening to others as well. Right?
Yeah. Well, potentially they are, and potentially just their resistance to the other side's beliefs is perceived as a threat to them. So, I mean, the one thing I'm sure you've seen in conflicts, the one thing that's super interesting to me all the time when I'm dealing with conflicts is a lot of times both parties, whether it's a group or a person on both sides, have this same exact story about the other.
Yes.
Like, one feels like they don't appreciate me, they don't care about me, they're not, whatever. And the other one says the same exact thing. It's like, okay, well, we both have the same the same perception going on. Let's try to clear this up and get aligned here. I mean, if you had a very strong, let's pretend you have a very strong belief about, there's plenty of people that say, if you support Donald Trump, then you basically, I don't even understand how to talk to you anymore, right? I can't, you're a threat to my whole existence. And on the other side, they might say the same thing. If you don't support Donald Trump or whatever, if you support some other candidate or something, then you are a threat to my existence. And if you got them into the room and they were motivated, and this is a big part of conflict resolution too, is like, are people motivated enough to resolve the conflict? Because it's going to take some effort. If they're motivated enough, then you can start to like help them talk in a way that seems caring. Like, in other words, wait a minute. Okay, I supported Donald Trump. Yes. But let me tell you, and I don't know what it's going to take to convince you, but I actually really care about you and your family and your safety. And I want to make sure you're safe too. And I'm not overlooking that. And like, if I can get that across to you, the belief that I like supported this or that might confuse you, but if you really thought that I cared about you, then the threat perception would start to go down. You'd stop thinking like, oh, they're just going to do whatever they want, regardless of how it affects me and my life and my family. You'd actually start to think, oh, they're considering what's going to happen to me and my family now. Okay, so now I'm feeling better about I can actually talk to this person. That's what we got to get, that care piece across. That's, to me, that's the big lever.
Yeah, because it's really the only way that people actually will hear you, right?
Yeah.
Like if you feel like someone's threatening you, the listening, the hearing all goes out the window.
Yeah.
And now there's not really much communication going on because your brain, like, talk about what's happening in your brain and why I can't hear you if I think you're a threat to me.
Yeah, well, like we were talking about earlier, it's, there's different entirely, I mean, I want to say entirely because there's a lot of different connections. But in general, from what a lot of the science says, is that there's areas of the brain and associated areas of the whole nervous system that are more activated or upregulated when we are in threat perception. When we perceive a threat, we go into defense. Our brains are saying it's time to survive. It's time to protect ourselves. It's like a different set of networks than the networks associated with the parasympathetic, which is the sort of rest and relax, or the connecting networks. So like things that would allow me to connect with you, to care for you, to be cared by, to collaborate with you, to be creative, all of those things, open-mindedness, curiosity, all of these elements are inhibited by the networks that are upregulated during threat perception. And it's because our brains and nervous systems were basically designed to do that. Like, who cares about all that other stuff? We need to focus all our energetic resources, all our metabolic resources on just surviving. That's what the brain's saying. And the weird thing about the human brain is that the same networks that are associated with surviving in a physical attack get activated regardless of the nature of the perceived attack, whether it's physical, verbal, psychological, whatever, social. And so all those same things are happening. And so you disrespect me, you disrespect my group, you threaten my group, even just like from a status perspective, et cetera. Those same things that, like, if you held a knife to my throat, the same kind of networks are going up. And all I can think about at this moment is survive. I can't think about anything else because my brain won't allow it. So, we have to get out of that state if we're trying to resolve conflicts.
Okay, so here we are. Let me just sort of walk through where we are so far in the conflict. So far, we're trying to de-escalate. So, you talked about some deep breathing. You talked about, just really trying to change the story, right?
Yeah.
So here's my question. So if we're already escalated and our executive functioning is already like down-regulated, how do we change our stories in that moment when we can't really access it because we're in fight or flight mode?
It's very tough and it's almost impossible to make that decision in that moment. So I think it requires making a decision beforehand, and just having a sort of general decision matrix, you might call like a term or a boundary for yourself that says, if I know my triggers, like in these particular situations or with this particular person or group or this stimulus, I am going to do my best to self-regulate. And that means when I start to feel heated around the stimulus, I will do X, Y, Z. I will breathe. I will tell myself this story because that's what's going on in my head, et cetera. So you have to have a little bit of a plan, and you have to practice the plan, especially when you're not dysregulated. So when you are regulated, start practicing, getting good at it, so that when you become dysregulated, it becomes a little easier to actually implement. Otherwise, it's going to be impossible. And by the way, even if you're really good at it and you practice a lot, you're still probably going to get dysregulated sometimes. But the key, if you can, is to get out of the dysregulation, more quickly over time as you get better at it. It's not that you're not going to get triggered. You're probably going to get triggered. But once you get triggered, can you become aware of it? Can you go, I'm feeling the heat. I need to self-regulate. I need to tell myself a new story. I need to recondition this, And the more that you do that, the more you are actually deconditioning the stimulus response relationship to the individual or the group. And again, to me, it all starts with motivation. Like, do you want to stop feeling like this towards that person? Because some people are like, I'm justified in feeling like that. Like, I don't want to stop feeling like that. Why should I? Kind of thing. So
one of the things that I like to, it's an exercise that I like to help people like notice when they're escalated, is when you're feeling normal, to sort of like envision what it feels like when you're very angry, whatever thing, right? And you want to go ahead and make yourself feel angry, and then notice, where is it going into your body?
Yeah.
Are your jaws clenching? Is your head pounding? Does people say, oh, my stomach was in knots? So you want to kind of notice where it goes, because your body will tell you before your brain actually realizes it. Yeah. So then when they're in the middle of it, I've had clients tell me later on, hey, Alice, the minute my jaws clenched, I realized in that moment, I'm mad right now. So like let the body tell you, right?
It's great. Yeah. Because a lot of times the body's reacting way quicker than the brain, or at least quicker than what you are aware of in the brain. And so sometimes, like, if you become aware of the body doing something, I think the behavioral approach to self-regulation is great. You can catch things on a behavior, on a feeling level, on a sensation level, probably quicker than you can on like a story or psychological level. So absolutely. I think that's really important. Yeah. Those kinds of exercises where you're basically doing like imagined exposure to a stimulus are really important. In the book, I kind of, I have like a technique where I prompt someone to like go find either a news anchor or a podcaster or someone who just like they would never listen to, because it's just like, this person's crazy and they believe they're on the far or whatever. And, and so like listen to them for like 10 seconds, notice what happens. And when you start to feel it, pause and start to practice self-regulation and get better and better at that in the face of a stimulus, and see if you can decondition or neutralize the stimulus. And if you can do that, then after some practice, we can start to work with like a real life interpersonal conflict.
So let me ask you then, in this deconditioning phase, do you feel like it's necessary to also try to depersonalize what the other person is saying? Meaning like you're not taking it personally, that you can kind of like remove yourself and not take everything the other person is saying as a threat to you personally, and just say, you know what, I don't really care what you say. I'm not going to worry about it. Like, is it necessary in order to get to that de-escalated state?
I don't know if it's necessary all the time, but certainly I think it can be extremely helpful. Even if it seems personal, even if they're making it personal, you could remind yourself that, hey, something's going on for them. This is not about me. This is about what's happening in their mind. And they might think it's about me, but it's not. And I'm not going to internalize their story. It's not about me. I'm okay. I'm safe. I can handle this. Like that kind of stuff. So reassuring yourself in the face of that, I think, is important. But you ever read the 4 Agreements? One of the, I think like following those, my wife and I were talking about this the other day, like following those tenets, like if you follow those tenets, you're going to resolve all conflicts pretty much. Like, don't make assumptions, don't take things personally. Like, but I think it's a great rule of thumb if you cannot take things personally. Sometimes it's hard because somebody's trying to make it personal. They're, personally attacking you or character attacking you or something. So, but I do think it's a great technique. One of the psychological techniques to help neutralize is just to like, this isn't about me. That's about them. Even if they're making it, this is about them.
Okay. So now we're like neutralizing ourselves. Obviously this is taking a lot of work, right? This is not like literally in the moment,
it's hard, yeah.
And it's very difficult. And I think it's like a lifelong practice, right?
For sure. For sure.
Just like people who meditate, it's a lifelong practice that they meditate. So, and by the way, I do feel like meditation also helps de-escalate later on in your day, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Because it sort of grounds you, it centers you, so you can start from a place of neutrality,
Yeah.
as opposed to like starting sleep deprived or starting that you're already upset about something, or that sort of
If
thing.
you're
But
out of balance in any way, exhausted, hungry, tired, whatever, like you're going to be way more prone to get into an escalated state for sure.
yes, absolutely. So now let's say we're able to de-escalate ourselves,
Yeah.
right? Now what? Now what do we do with the conflict that we are still in at the moment?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of things to do, but the first thing, I mean, I always break conflict resolution into kind of two buckets. One is the care bucket, and one is the solution bucket. So if it was an escalated if it's just a regular old conflict, and there's no escalation, you might go straight to a solution. That might be fine. But in an escalated situation where people's feelings were hurt or there's some emotional charge, typically it's best not to go straight to solution. It's best to go to like a care piece first. So one of the important pieces about care is listening to each other. And this is like my third principle is about being curious. And part of being, so if you're looking at a spectrum again, curiosity and certainty are on complete opposites of the spectrum. And so when we are in conflict, a lot of times we get into these narrow thinking and we become kind of certain that my side of the story is the right side. My side of the conflict is the right side, moral side, the ethical, whatever it is. I remember things correctly, or I know what's really happening, or something like that. And so when you're in those states, you're not in a curious state, and that can really impair the sort of peace building approach. So trying to get out of certainty, and there's lots of things to understand about how the brain works and how many biases are at play all the time to like just go, wow, how could I be really certain about anything? Like really questioning that and getting into like a sort of mantra of like, I don't know. So if I don't know, let me be curious. Let me be open. So staying curious is really important. The next piece is, obviously figuring out how to communicate in a way that's going to be received well, where you can also you can listen is really, the main part of communication, but then also speaking in a way that you are understanding a little bit more about how your words and tone and body language are impacting someone, and just being kind of, mindful of that. Getting into the care piece, like how do I give someone a sense that I am caring about what's going on for them? Caring about what their needs are, caring about how this experience is affecting them, caring about what their concerns are. So just getting into that care piece. So curious, staying, communicative, open-minded, caring. Those are really important. And then we can start to get into, okay, now how do we start to actually collaborate with each other and get creative around solving an issue that might be a little bit more complex? And both of us have different wants, and like, how do we navigate that? Well, maybe there's some needs underneath the wants that we can try to satisfy without looking at the sort of surface level stuff. So there's a lot. Yeah. So there's a lot. And all of these are requiring kind of different areas of the brain to actually facilitate.
And I want to dive a little bit deeper into what you said, which is like, listen, right? Being more curious and listen. Now, while that sounds like people understand those words, like, oh, just listen better.
Yeah.
I feel like there are some components to be able to communicate that you're actually listening. And even the phrase active listening, I don't feel like necessarily teaches people, or people don't quite understand what that entails. So talk a little bit more about, because, a lot of times I hear in conflict, one person says to the other person, you're not listening to me, right?
Yeah,
that comes
100%.
Right? Yeah. So talk about how can people combat that if someone comes at them and says, Jeremy, you're not listening to me. And they keep repeating themselves. Because people say, I don't know what else to do. They keep telling me that I'm not listening when I am. So how can we help them? Yeah,
that's a difficult one, right? Because you feel like almost like both sides feel like they're being gaslit on some level. I have various techniques that I kind of go over with this sort of thing. But I would ask someone if someone is asking, hey, how do I get someone to feel like I'm listening to them? I would just say to them for a second, like, can we flip the script? If you were in their shoes, or maybe you are in their shoes, what do you feel like you would need to feel listened to? And they might be able to answer that. Okay, so can you do that for them? And that's just that's a good question and kind of conversation starter. But in general, if someone is talking and they want to get through their idea and they feel like they're not being listened to, the first thing, of course, is something talked about a lot in conflict resolution, which is the validating piece, which is paraphrasing, summarizing, reflecting, etc. So I hear what you're saying, and then before I start to respond to it, I actually repeat back what I'm hearing, so that you know that I'm listening and you heard it, but B, you have a chance to correct me if I didn't hear it correctly. And I said, okay, so you're wanting to move the meeting to Sunday at 5 p.m. No, that's not what I said. I said Monday at 5, or I said I only want to do that one time. Okay, so you only want to do it one time this month. Okay, so like that's an important piece. I would then suggest that before responding in a way that we're just either defending or negating someone's idea, that you try to steel man their point of view. Like you try to actually get on their side for a second and figure out what the merit or the value is in what they're saying, and get on their team for just a moment. Like, as if I were in your shoes, why would I think that this is a valuable approach or idea or whatever? So I would repeat back. I'd say, okay, so you want to move the meeting to Monday at 5 p.m. just this month. Got it. And so I see why that would be important, because obviously, because if we did that, then we could include the rest of the marketing team, and we can make sure that everybody gets home on time. And so and we're not going into the night too far. So that makes sense. I understand why that would be important. Let me think about that for a moment. I'm going to process it, show them that I'm actually thinking about it. And then if I have concerns about it, or I see a challenge with it, then I bring it up in that way of a collaborative approach. And I say, so here are my concerns. I'm wondering if you thought about this. Concern number one is, one of my challenges. Challenge number one is, if we do it at 5, we're not going to make it in time for the client deadline. I don't think, because it's going to be right on the edge there. I'm a little concerned about that. Have you thought about that at all? Or do you have any ideas of like, how would we would approach that or meet that challenge? And then it's a conversation. Okay. And they can tell me, well, why they're not concerned about it, or they didn't think about that, or they did think about that, and here's an idea that they have about it. So that opens up the conversation, and now we're in a kind of conflict. We're in a kind of negotiation at some point. Right. And so like that even if we get to, this is not about everybody agreeing. It's not about like, okay, at the end of the day, I'm just going to give in and tell you we're going to do what you want to do. It's just about the experience of that conversation. Because at the end of the day, we're not always going to get our way, and that might be frustrating, but it's way less frustrating than not feeling listened to during the conversation. And so that experience alone will help preserve a relationship. Whereas if you just dismiss someone and just say, no, that idea is not going to work, and here's why, and we're not going that way, then it's going to break some trust.
I also warn people that using phrases like "I understand" or "I hear you" are just useless.
Yeah. I also don't like before paraphrasing or summarizing. I don't like when someone says, "What I hear you saying is," or something like that, because it just feels formulaic and kind of condescending. So, and some people are like, "Well, how do I repeat?" So you can just like literally repeat. Okay, so you want to do this, like just really naturally, or if you want to set it up, you could say something like, there is like 3 or 4 minutes of talking, and I'd say, okay, there was a lot there that you just told me. Is it okay if I just repeat back some of the stuff I heard, so I can make sure that I heard it correctly? Right. And then you can say it, and it's less condescending that way.
Yeah. I think what's important about that setup is that if the other person does not know that you're doing this to make sure that the communication is clear and that you received everything, you sometimes, especially if it's in a slightly escalated state where people are not very happy with each other, if you just dive in and say, well, you want to do this, a lot of times what I've experienced is people say stuff like, why are you parroting me?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And then now we're back to escalating.
Yeah.
And so I think
you're treating me like a child. It's condescending, right? Like, yeah. So
I know what I just said, right? I know what I just said. Why are you doing this?
Why are you saying,
So I feel like just at least letting them know the reason why you're about to say everything back, then suddenly it changes the dynamic incredibly.
Yeah, for sure.
Because the other thing that happens is if you tell me, Jeremy, hey, Alice, let me make sure I'm understanding everything that you said. Now I am dropping into listening mode because I want to make sure that you got everything that I said.
Right, exactly.
Right. And so then can you talk a little bit about what's going on in the brain? Because like there's a lot of chemical shifts happening in those moments where you just say one sentence and all of a sudden, like, you're changing my chemical structure right now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's so many things happening during communication. There's so many little nuanced, you know, I don't think it'd be necessarily worth our time to go into like what's happening visually and audibly and stuff like that. But uh, one of the big things is like your brain. So the area associated with the amygdala and the hippocampus and stuff, and sort of those areas in the limbic regions. They're like a valence check. So it's not, the amygdala is just not just like a defense mechanism. It's not just like it's amygdala and then it's defense. No, it's like they're valence checkers. They're just saying, is this a positive or negative thing? And if it's negative, I'm going into like a defense mode. If it's positive, I can kind of stay relaxed and not so hyperactive. And so one of the things is like my brain and my mind, and who knows how they're really working together, but there's stories, cognitive stories, subcognitive stories, and there's also neural mechanisms that are operating on conditioning and predictions, et cetera. And they're all working together in some strange, weird way that no one really clearly understands. And you're saying something to me, and there's an interpretation happening. And that interpretation is going to directly result in how my body and mind respond, and then my communication, my behavior. So lots of different things can be happening. And so that's why it's like, I thinking about how many different nuances there are in communication and what's happening when I'm receiving it versus when I'm giving it, and back and forth. It's like a miracle that we're actually able to communicate and get an intention across that you actually understand. And it's like a real intent. It's like, it's a miracle. There's so much room for misinterpretation.
Yes.
And so it's really important to like get as clear as possible with each other and check in, and how's this landing with you? What's happening in your head right now? Like, tell me what's going on in your mind,
Yeah, because, just like you said, what's happening in my head right now, sometimes I can't even listen because I might be rehearsing my response.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's
You're waiting
lot
for the defense. Yeah.
Yep. So I feel like the ability to allow me to listen when you just frame things, just say, hey, let me make sure I got what you said. That's going to change me from being escalated to de-escalated, because now I'm like, okay, let me listen and see what Jeremy, did he get everything? And now I can clarify, well, you got 90% of it, but the 10%, let me just clarify the piece that you didn't quite understand. Right. And so we can do that. And so that really does help like de-escalate the conflict overall, doing that kind of thing. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Reflective listening is really a really powerful tool. It's like one of the more powerful tools, is like being able to reflect back what you hear and someone feel heard. It's a really powerful tool. I think also, like, if you're motivated to take down the emotional charge with someone and you're having a conversation, I think there's some things you could say, and it's context dependent, but I think there's some things that you could say around reassuring the person before you even get into the stories and the conversation, of just like, hey, listen, I know there's been some tension. I just want you to know, like, I really appreciate you. I highly value you. Like, there might've been some confusion around your job or something. Like, there is no talk or threat at all to your job. You are safe. Like, let's put that off the table. Like, that's not even a consideration. So, then now let's have a conversation, like, so there's certain things that could be happening that you could just reassure someone right off the bat, and it takes down the temperature a little bit before you even start the conversation.
Absolutely. I do that a lot. Like, for example, people call me and they're calling me for divorce mediation. Mm-hmm. And one of the first things they might say to me is something like, we don't want to deal with lawyers. So that's why we're calling you, right? Now, in my little talk that I give them, my little short educational talk about divorce mediation, there's a section where I talk about where lawyers come in, where it's helpful for them to either advise them or whatever, right? Now, I know, because of what you and I are talking about right now, that if I just launch into that section, they're going to say, they're going to stop listening, number one. And number two, they're going to say, I already told you, Alice, we don't want to use lawyers.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's what's going to happen. And it's going to immediately escalate.
Yeah.
And so because I know this, I preface that little section and I say, I heard what you said, that you don't want to use attorneys. However, let me just tell you where they can come in handy. So now I've sort of like let them know that I've heard them. and that there is still another reason why I'm bringing it up anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm signaling. I'm
Yeah.
signaling using the words.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's important and totally appropriate to tell people there are other options, or there are things outside of the sort of box or structure you've created for this particular conversation. And I know that what your preferences are. I want you to know that. And I'm not going to I'm not going to force anything on you, but I just want to put it out there that there are some other options that are at least worth mentioning, and then we can make a decision later.
Yeah, definitely. This has been really a fantastic conversation, Jeremy. Thank you so much for being here. Tell us a little bit more about like when your book is coming out, where they can find it.
Yeah. Well, you can pre-order the book now on any platform, basically, but it's being released June 3rd, 2026. So it should be out soon, and should have some fun kind of workshops and stuff around the book when it comes out.
Wonderful. And if anyone wants to work with you or get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, just come to my website, pollackpeacebuilding.com. You can schedule a consultation with one of my chief program officers.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Jeremy, for being with us today. This is a lovely conversation. And thank you, listeners, for joining on another episode of Negotiation with Alice. Until next time.